By the third night of the Marrowbone blizzard, Ash Coulee Flats had vanished. The wind ran across the flats at more than 60 miles an hour. The cold had fallen to 31 below. Snow filled the air until no line remained between earth and sky. At Larkspur Fold, a section of the willow windbreak tore loose. Verena Kessler knotted a rope around her waist and put the free end in Roan Merrick's hands. If the wall failed, the wind would find the offset barn door and seal it shut. Inside, Emil counted the marker posts through the white. The baby cried behind the canvas curtain his late wife had sewn. A milk cow strained in early labor. Lem Pruitt, the hand who had laughed at Verena's work, lay spent beside the stove. The rope jerked once, then went slack. 4 months earlier, Verena had walked onto this ground with one trade: milk for her children, a wall out of the wind. How had it come to rest on whether one tired woman could keep her feet? Late in September of 1886, Verena Kessler reached Larkspur Fold with nothing but a handcart, 2 children, and her dead husband's tools. The handcart had lost a spoke somewhere east of the cannonball, and she had bound the wheel with a strip of harness leather so it turned without truing. It wobbled. It carried what was left of them: a crate of augers and a brace and bit, a broadaxe wrapped in sacking, a brass-sounding rod Anton had used to read the depth of a well by the sound it made coming up, a leather tool roll, its strap restitched by his own hand the winter before he died, and under a folded quilt, the baby, Greta, 7 months old, and beside the cart on his own 2 feet, Emil, who was 9 and had stopped asking how far. They had come a long way to be turned off a long way of porches. At the first place, a man had looked at the children and then at the sky and said his own stores would not stretch. At the second, a woman had given Emil an apple and told them the next ranch was kinder. It was not. By the fourth, Verena had stopped knocking with any hope in it. She knocked because the children had to be somewhere by dark. Emil had a habit now that she watched and said nothing about. When there was cornbread, he ate half and folded the other half into the pocket of his coat, pressed flat so it would not crumb. He did it without looking at her. A boy who saves half his bread has quit believing there will be more. She had not been able to argue him out of it, because on most days he had been right. Larkspur Fold sat where a coulee cut down toward a creek that still ran, barely, under a skin of morning ice. She read the place the way Anton had taught her to read any place: before you trust it, before you spend a nickel on it. She read it and did not like most of what it told her. The barn faced the wrong way. Its wide door opened straight into the northwest, into the throat of every winter wind that came off the flats. The haystack sat directly on the ground, and the ground was damp, and the bottom of the stack had gone dark and sweet with rot. A trough by the well held standing water that would not drain. The chinking between the logs of the house had cracked and fallen in a dozen places, and she could see daylight through the north wall where a man's hand had packed the mud too fat with clay so that it dried and shrank and let the wind in. And a stand of willows, 8 or 10 of them, grew in a rough line 30-some feet off the barn's northwest corner. Old willows. Planted, not wild. Someone had set them there on purpose a long time ago, and the wind coming off the flats bent around them and left the ground behind them scoured clean of the deepest drifts. The willows had stayed the same for years. The weather had not. And the ground remembered which had won. A man came out of the barn with a bucket of milk and stopped when he saw them. Roan Merrick was somewhere past 40, broad through the shoulder, with a stillness to him that came from talking to himself too long. He looked at the cart and the tools and the boy and the shape of the baby under the quilt. He did not look sorry for them. Verena counted that in his favor. You lost? Roan said. No, Verena said. I know exactly where I am. I'm at the last place before the river, and the river's froze at the edges, and it's near dark. Roan set the bucket down. I've got no work for a family. You've got a barn pointed into the wind, and a haystack rotting from the bottom, and a north wall a child could throw a cat through. She set it flat, without heat, the way you read a bill of goods. I'd say you've got nothing but work. He was quiet a moment. Then he did the thing that made her stay. I need a maid, Roan said. You need a roof. My wife's been dead 3 years, and this house has gone to seed. You keep it. You cook. You mind the stock when I'm out. You and the young ones get the back room and what's in the cellar. That's the trade. It was a fair offer and an honest one, and it would have kept them alive to spring, and Verena Kessler shook her head. I'll keep your house, she said. I'll cook and I'll mind the stock, but that's not the trade, or not all of it. She set her hand on the tool roll. My husband dug wells and set mills from the Platte to the Missouri, and I kept his books and held his line, and I learned every foot of it. That barn will kill your stock this winter if it stands the way it stands. I can turn it. I can turn all of it before the ground freezes hard. Give my children milk and a wall out of the wind, and I'll mend what the cold means to take. Roan looked at her a long time. The milk comes first, he said at last. Your claims can wait till morning. He carried the bucket to them himself. He filled a tin cup and gave it to Emile, and the boy drank half and then, out of habit, started to lower the cup with the rest still in it. Roan pushed it gently back up. Finish it, he said. There's more in the cow. Emile finished it. He did not put anything in his pocket. It was, Verena thought, the first honest thing that had happened to them in 100 miles. That night, Roan brought a lamp back into the barn corner where they had spread their quilts, and with it he brought something else, an unfinished cradle, half built, the joints cut clean and the rockers not yet fixed on. He set it near the baby without a word and turned to go. Verena said, You could have burned that for kindling any winter these 3 years. Roan stopped at the door. Some rooms are built and never filled, he said, and went out. She fitted the quilt down into the cradle and laid Greta in it. It held her as though it had been waiting. In the morning she did not touch the tools. Anton had taught her that a man who starts swinging before he's looked will spend the winter fixing his own hurry. So she walked the place with a wool strip in her hand. She tied the wool to a stick and held it up at the barn door and watched it stand straight out to the southeast, which meant the wind that would come off the flats had a clear run of a mile before it hit that open doorway. She walked to the haystack and pushed her arm into the base of it and drew it out damp to the elbow, and she showed Roan the dark of it without a word. She knelt at the trough and watched how slow the water crept toward the low corner, too slow, so that the last of it would sit and freeze and split the wood. She stood at the north wall and laid her palm flat against the chinking, the way Anton used to lay his palm flat against a wall before he trusted it, and where her hand covered a crack, she felt the cold come through it like a knife laid flat. She did not wave her arms and describe a winter to him. She pointed. The wool, the damp arm, the slow water, the cold coming through her fingers. Then she pointed at the willows. Somebody planted those, she said. My wife did, Roan said. Della, first spring we were here. I told her it was a waste of a good afternoon. The ground behind them is the only ground on this place that isn't drifted 3 feet by February, I'd wager. Roan looked at the willows as if he had never counted them before. "It is," he said slowly. "It always is." "Then she wasn't wasting an afternoon. She was building you a wall and letting the willows do the standing." Verena turned in a slow circle, taking the measure of the light and the wind and the slope of the ground toward the coulee. "You've got maybe 10 weeks of workable dirt before it's iron. I can't do all of it. I can do the things that decide whether you keep your stock." She looked at him. "You give me a week to prove I'm worth feeding. If I'm not, I keep house, and we're square." "You get 1 week," Roan said. She started with the hay, because no man ever argued about his hay going bad, and because it gave her a way to put Emil to work. The stack was rotting because it sat in the wet, so they would lift it. She and Roan cut cottonwood poles and laid a floor of them a good 8 inches off the ground, and between the poles she left gaps, narrow channels running the length of the crib so that air could move under the whole stack and carry the damp out instead of letting it sit. The measuring she gave to Emil. She handed him a knotted cord and showed him a knot for 8 inches and a knot for 2 feet, and set him to marking where every pole should sit. He worked with his tongue between his teeth and his brow down, and when he had the first 6 poles spaced true, he stood back and said, "They're even," and it was the most words he had said since the cannonball. Verena did not make anything of it. She only said, "They are, do the rest," and let him have the rest. They had the crib half loaded when a rider came up the coulee road. He was a stock inspector out of the Territorial Association, a spare gray man named Whitfield Osgood, who had ridden the flats for 20 years and buried more optimistic men than he could count. He sat his horse and looked at the crib with the flat interest of someone who had seen every clever idea fail once. "You'll cook that hay," Osgood said. "You pack a stack loose with air running through the guts of it, and if it goes up damp, it heats from the inside, and one morning you've got a fire nobody lit." It was a fair thing to say. Verena had waited half her life to be doubted by a man who knew what he was talking about, and she found she almost liked him for it. "It heats when the damp's trapped in it," she said. "The channels are so the damp gets out, not stays in. I'll cut a test plug from the middle every week and read it. If it comes out warm, we tear it down that hour." "Read it against what? Your say-so?" "Against a book." She had already started one, a thin ledger of Roan's, and she opened it to show him. A column for the date. A column for the plug, warm or cool. A column for the wood they burned, the ice on the trough, the reach of the drifts. Numbers in her small square hand. Osgood looked at the ledger a long moment. "I don't believe your system will work," he said. "You should not," Verena said. "Not until it does." He rode off without agreeing to anything. But he had read the ledger. She had seen him read it. That was the whole of what she wanted from him for now. That evening she found dry gloves laid over the woodbox by the stove, a pair too small for Roan's hands. He had cut down an old pair of his own and re-sewn them to fit hers, and he had said nothing about it, and he never would. She put them on. They fit. She said nothing either. In the morning she set 2 tin cups by the stove instead of 1, his and hers, and filled them both. And when Roan came in cold from the milking and saw the second cup steaming there beside his own, something moved in his face and was gone. The water line came next. The trough would not drain, so the last of the water sat in the low corner and froze, and would, given a hard enough night, split the trough clean. She dug a line from the well and pitched it to run slightly downhill into the trough and out a small stone-packed sump on the far side, so that whatever the stock did not drink would drain itself away and leave the pipe empty and dry before the cold could catch it standing. She dug it 4 feet and a hand deep, below the reach of an ordinary frost, and she set an iron coupling where the pipe turned toward the trough, and she was proud of that coupling, and the coupling was the first thing that betrayed her. But that came later. The chinking betrayed her first. She mixed her own the way Anton had, clay and sand and a little lime and cut straw, and she packed the worst of the north wall with it in a long afternoon, pleased with the neat gray line of it drying in the sun. By the third morning it had cracked from end to end and pulled back from the logs, and where she pressed it the whole run of it crumbled into her palm. Too much clay. It had dried too fast and shrunk and let go, a day's work fallen out of the wall. Emil watched her stand there with the ruined mud in her hand, and she saw him waiting for the excuse, the way children of hard years learn to wait for the excuse. "Too much clay," Verena said. "It shrank. I mixed it wrong. We start over." Roan had come around the corner in time to hear it. He crouched and took a pinch of the fallen chinking and rubbed it between his fingers. "My father chinked this house," he said. "He put ash in his mix, wood ash, and a little more sand. Said it held tighter and quit shrinking. I watched him do it 40 times and never once did it myself." He looked almost ashamed of the knowing. "I could show you the ash he kept it in. It's still in the lean-to." So the man who could not build supplied the recipe, and the woman who could build mixed it new, ash and sand and clay, in the measure his dead father had used. And it went on gray and held gray, and it did not shrink, and the north wall went dark and tight and quiet. 2 people, each holding a piece of one wall. Neither of them said anything about that either. "You mix a fine mud, Kessler," Osgood said, come back around on his second pass, running a thumbnail along the new seam and finding it sound. He said it grudging. He also took out a small book of his own and wrote something in it, and did not tell her what. She left the windbreak for last because the windbreak was the thing that would start an argument, and it did. Della's willows told her where a wall belonged and how it ought to behave. A wall that stopped the wind dead only made a new cliff for the wind to pour over and pile snow behind. Della's willows did not stop the wind. They combed it. They slowed it and broke it, and let enough through to keep the drifts from building, and the clean ground behind them proved it every February for years. So Verena would build the same thing, longer and taller, a woven wall of willow and brush set 34 feet northwest of the barn, angled to feed the broken wind past the door instead of into it, and she would weave it to let a little wind through, not to hold all of it back. Her first weave was too tight. She built the first 40 feet of it close and solid, proud of how little light showed through, and the first stiff wind off the flats climbed the face of it and rolled clean over the top and dropped a drift on the barn side worse than no wall at all. She stood in the drift the next morning up to her knee and understood exactly what she had done. That was when Warren Colhane rode over to enjoy it. Colhane ran 4,000 head on the open range to the north and west, and Larkspur Fold sat across the only easy road down to the creek, and he had offered to buy Roan out twice and been refused twice, and he had a freighter's interest in that road and a cattleman's interest in that water. He sat a tall horse and looked at Verena standing in the drift her own wall had made. "So this is the well-digger's widow," Colhane said, "come to teach ranching to a man's country." He looked at the wall and the drift and laughed, not cruelly, which was worse. "A wall that makes a bigger drift than no wall. That's a wonder. You keep her on for the entertainment, Merrick?" "A wall that stops everything becomes another cliff," Verena said before Roan could answer. "This one's too tight. I built it wrong. I'll build it loose, and it'll comb the wind instead of catching it, and the drift will move off past the door. You can come back in a week and laugh at it again, if it's still worth laughing at." Colhane's smile thinned. That road of yours washes out every spring, he said to Roan. A man could file to have it made a county freight road, straighten it, widen it, right through your low ground and your water. He let it sit. Be a shame, all that work she's doing, if the county came through the middle of it. He rode off. It was not an idle thing he had said, and all three of them knew it. Roan looked at the ruined tight weave and the drift behind it. He did not look angry with her, which she had braced for. You told him you built it wrong, Roan said. I did build it wrong. Most would have blamed the wind. The wind did just what wind does, Verena said. She was already pulling the tight weave apart to start it over. I'm the one that got surprised by it. Roan bent and took hold of a willow length and began pulling with her. You promised to fix it, he said. You never promised to guess right the first time. They rebuilt it loose. She wove it open enough that a hand's worth of daylight came through the whole face, and she raised it to 7 feet 4 inches at its tallest and stepped it down at the ends, and she set it the full 34 feet off the corner so the broken wind had room to spread before it reached the barn. When the next wind came, the wool strip at the barn door no longer stood straight out. It stirred, it wandered, and the drift built out along the willows where she wanted it and left the ground by the door nearly bare. The last thing was the barn door itself. She could not turn the barn, but she could cheat the wind at the mouth of it. She framed a short baffle wall a few feet out from the door and offset to one side, so a man or a cow could turn in behind it out of the straight blast, and the wind that used to drive full into the doorway now had to bend around a corner to get at it, and a bending wind cannot pack a drift the way a straight one can. She built it in an afternoon. Roan held the boards while she nailed, and neither of them talked, and it was the most companionable hour she had spent since Anton went into the ground. Lem Pruitt, the hired hand, watched most of it from the fence with a stem of dead grass in his teeth. Pruitt was young and easy and thought most work was funny that he did not have to do. When Verena set out to plant marker posts along the path from house to barn, short posts with strips of red flannel nailed to their tops so a body could feel their way home in a blow, Pruitt laughed out loud. Flags, he said. You gonna signal the storm to come polite? A man walks 50 feet in a whiteout and he's lost, Verena said. She kept nailing flannel. These tell you where the barn is when you can't see your own hand. I've walked these flats blind drunk and found the door every time. Then you'll have no use for them, Verena said, and I'll not charge you for the ones you don't use. Roan snorted. Pruitt spat the grass out and went to muck the stalls, still grinning. He would not be grinning by February, but February had not come yet. The first hard cold snap came the last week of October, 3 nights that fell to 14 below, and it told her most of what she had done right, and one thing she had done wrong. The barn was warmer than it had ever been. The stock stood easy in it. She read the ledger against Roan's memory of other Octobers, and found they had burned 5 armloads of firewood a day, where the old barn and the leaking house together used to eat 7. The hay plug came out cool and dry and sweet. The new chinking held. The windbreak, in its first real test, combed a 40-mile wind down to something the wool strip only leaned against, and the ground by the offset door stayed nearly clear, and on the second morning the trough was dry and cracked with ice, and the water would not come. The coupling, the one she had been proud of. It had a low pocket she had not pitched hard enough, and a spoonful of water had stood in it overnight and frozen and swelled and shouldered the joint apart, and now the line ran empty into the ground and the trough sat dry. The stock stood around it and looked at her. Emil was watching again. So was Osgood, who had ridden in to see how the flats had fared, and stood now with his hands in his coat, waiting like the rest of them to see what she would say. I missed it, Verena said. There's a low spot in the coupling I didn't pitch out. It held water, and the water froze and broke the joint. My fault, start to finish. She thawed the line with hot rags in a kettle, dug down to the coupling, and reset it with a hard downhill pitch, and no pocket anywhere in it for water to stand, so the whole line would drain itself dry the moment the stock quit drinking. She did it in the cold with her cut-down gloves on, and Roan hauled the kettles, and by dark the water ran again and drained clean, and the trough filled and would not stand full through a freeze. That night Osgood sat by the stove a long while over the ledger. He turned the pages slow. 5 armloads, not 7. Plug cool. Chinking sound. Drift off the door. And then, in her square hand, the honest line. Coupling froze. My error. Repitched. You wrote down the one that broke, Osgood said. That's the only kind worth writing down, Verena said. Anybody can keep a book of what worked. Osgood closed the ledger. I've seen 100 men build clever, he said. I've not seen many write down the day they were wrong and then go fix it in the cold. He stood and settled his hat. It's not belief, understand me, but I'll want to see this book again after a real one. He meant a real storm. They all knew what he meant. Keep it honest, and I'll read it honest. For 3 weeks after the snap, she filled the ledger, and the ledger filled with the shape of a thing that was working. Wood burned low and steady. Trough, drained each night, never split. Hay, cool and dry, plug after plug. Drifts, marked in feet, always where she had aimed them, and never at the door. Emile learned to read the trough for her and call out the ice. And one gray morning she noticed the half-piece of cornbread was no longer going into his coat pocket. She never said a word about it. Neither did Roan, who had taken to leaving an extra piece of bread by the boy's bowl in the mornings, quiet, as though it had always belonged there. Then Colhane came back, and he was not laughing. He had filed on the road. The county was to survey a freight road down the coulee in the spring, straight through Larkspur's low ground and its water, and until the survey he had the say-so to close the old road to hauling whenever the ground was soft or the weather turned, which on the flats in winter was any day he pleased. He sat his horse in the yard and told them so plainly, and told Roan there was still a fair price on the table for a man who'd sell before the road took it for nothing. You'll not haul a wagon of winter hay down that road once I say it's closed, Colhane said. Sell now, Merrick, and winter's my worry, or keep it, and it's yours. He rode off. Roan stood in the cold yard and watched him go. He can do it, Roan said. Close the road. I've got hay standing at Fenwick's I meant to haul in December. If the road's shut, I can't get it. Verena was already turning it over, the way Anton had taught her to turn over any hard number. How much hay's in the crib now? Enough for the stock we've got. Not enough for a long one. I was counting on the Fenwick hay. Then we count on the crib. She looked at the crib and the stock and the sky, doing the arithmetic out loud so he could check it. We cull nothing we can save. We ration from the day the first real snow flies, not the day we run short. We feed to keep them living, not fat. She met his eyes. How many days of hay if his road stays closed and no more comes in? Roan did the count himself, and it took him a while, and when he had it, his jaw set. 26, he said. 26 days, fed careful, and then they starve. Then we prepare for 26, Verena said, and we pray the storm shorter than the hay. The last week of the year, the weather went strange. The cold eased off to something almost soft, and the wind lay down, and for 2 days the flat sat still in yellow-gray under a sky the color of a dirty fleece. The geese that had strung south for a month were gone all at once, not a wing left on the whole horizon. Roan tapped the glass on the wall, and the needle had fallen further than he had ever seen it fall, and it was still going down. Inside, Emil had gone quiet in the way he had at the start, watching the yellow sky through the window and saying nothing. Verena laid a hand on his shoulder and felt him lean the smallest amount into it. In the cradle by the stove, Greta slept, one fist against her cheek, while the curtain Della had sewn stirred once in a draught that should not have been there. The stillness was the kind that had a weight to it. Verena stood in the yard with the wool strip hanging dead from its stick, no wind at all to move it, and read the still sky the way Anton had taught her to read the quiet that comes before the worst of it. "It's coming," she said, "and it's going to be a long one." Roan looked at the crib and the willows and the 26 days and the two children in the doorway behind them. "Then we prepare for the worst of it," he said. They had 2 days of stillness to get ready, and Verena spent them the way Anton had taught her to spend the calm before a bad one, doing the small, dull things that a man forgets until the wind is already screaming and it is too late to do them. She set marker posts from the house door to the barn, one every 12 feet, each with a strip of red flannel nailed to its top, and where the posts ran she strung a guide rope waist high from post to post so a body could hold the line hand over hand and never let go of the world. She ran a second line of posts out to the hay crib and to the well, and for those she used the last of Della's old split stakes, the bundle that had leaned untouched in the barn for 3 years, seasoned hard and gray and true. Roan carried them out himself and drove them, and did not say what it cost him to see his wife's stakes go into the ground for a storm. Emil worked the rope beside her, testing each knot the way she had shown him. He stopped at the barn and looked back down the line of flannel and rope toward the house. "Why both?" he said. "Why the rope and the posts? A rope holds you." "A rope keeps a man from drifting," Verena said. "The posts tell him whether he's still going somewhere. Hold the rope in a whiteout and you know you're safe. Count the posts and you know you're getting closer." She pressed a flannel strip flat so the wind would not tear it. "Safe isn't the same as home. You want both." She packed a repair bag against the worst of it, spare willow lengths cut short, a coil of wire, a hatchet, a fistful of the flannel, and a driving hammer. She slung it closed with Anton's old tool roll strap, the leather he had restitched himself the last winter he was alive, and she looped that strap twice around her wrist and pulled it tight and did not think about why she trusted it more than any strap she could have cut new. Roan brought every head of stock inside behind the offset door and banked the barn walls with snow to the eaves for the warmth it held. They filled 2 barrels from the well and carried them in before the line could freeze. They split wood until their arms shook and stacked it high inside both doors. Roan and Pruitt drove the last of the stock in behind the offset door, the milk cows and the young stuff and the 2 workhorses, and packed them close for the warmth of their own bodies. Verena went down the line of them, with her hand flat on each flank, reading which ones were sound and which would want watching, the way Anton had read a wall. The heavy cow, the one due, she moved to the near stall by the stove wall, where the barn held its warmth the longest. Emil forked bedding deep under her without being told. He had stopped being a boy who waited to be told. Somewhere in the 8 weeks of work, he had become a boy who saw what wanted doing and did it, and Verena marked that in herself the way she marked a good number in the book. Osgood rode over on the second afternoon and sat his horse looking at the posts and the rope and the banked snow, and for a while he said nothing. "You've felt one of these before," he said finally. It was not a question. "On the Platte," Verena said. "The one in 80. It took my neighbor 40 feet from his own step." Osgood nodded slowly. "If it's the one I read in that sky, it'll be 3 days on the ground, and it won't ease in the middle to fool you. He gathered his reins. Keep to your rope, and if that book of yours comes through it still honest, I'll want to read it. He rode off toward town while there was still a road to ride. That night the first flakes came, fine and dry and moving sideways. By dawn, the Marrowbone blizzard had the whole of Ash Coulee Flats, and it hit exactly the way Verena had built for it to hit. The wind came off the northwest and struck the willow windbreak, and the willows did what Della's old ones had always done. They did not stop it. They combed it, spread it, bled it thin, and the broken wind that reached the barn had lost its teeth. The wool strip Verena had nailed inside the door leaned and shivered and did not stand straight out. Behind the barn, the drift built along the willows, out where she had aimed it, and the ground at the offset door stayed nearly clear because the wind that used to drive full into the doorway had to bend around her baffle wall to get at it, and could not pack a drift around a corner. At the trough, the water drained the moment the stock stopped drinking and left the line empty and dry, and the empty line did not split. In the crib, the hay stayed dry off the wet ground, and the air channels carried the last of the damp away, and the cool, sweet smell of good hay held even as the temperature outside fell past 20 below. Inside, behind the canvas curtain Della had sewn and Verena had hung across the corner as a draft barrier, the children stayed warm. Greta slept in the cradle. Emil sat by the stove with the ledger open, reading the trough and the wind, and calling the numbers to his mother, who wrote them in her square hand. 2 tin cups steamed on the stove, his and hers, filled and refilled. Verena went out twice in the night on the guide rope to read the wall and the door, and both times she came back and wrote it down. Wall holding, door clear, drift building off the willows, wood, 1 armload since dark, where the old barn would have wanted 3. She read the numbers to Roan in the lamplight, and he nodded over each one, and it was not until the second reading that she understood he was not checking her arithmetic. He was listening for her voice to come back in out of the storm. She said the numbers a little louder after that, out where the children could hear them too, so the whole warm corner would know each hour that the world outside was being held at the door. The first night held. The first night was the easy one. On the second day, the wind rose and the cold deepened, and the world outside the 2 doors went to nothing. A roaring gray-white wall a foot past the glass. In the middle of it, over the wind, they heard a sound that was not the wind, a man's voice, thin and wrong. Verena took the guide rope and went out into it, hand over hand, counting posts. She found Lem Pruitt at the 4th post from the barn, down on his knees, half buried, 1 arm hooked around the stake and the red flannel clenched in his fist. "I saw the cloth," Pruitt said, when she got him inside and his mouth would work again. His hands had gone the color of tallow. "I went to look at my own line up the coulee, and the whole world went white between one step and the next. I couldn't see my hand. I turned around and there was nothing." He looked at the flannel still knotted in his fingers as if it had spoken to him. "Then there was a red thing, then another one. I followed the red things home." Verena thawed his hands in cool water first, and then warmer the slow way, and pulled her own cut-down gloves onto them when they could feel again. Pruitt did not laugh at anything. He sat by the stove the rest of that night and would not sleep, watching the door as if the storm might learn to work the bar. Every hour or so Verena went out on the rope to read the wall, and every time she came back, Pruitt counted her, the way she had taught Emil to count the posts, as though by counting he could keep her coming back. When she asked him to read the trough numbers to spare her raw hands, he did it without a joke, and got them right, and wrote them into the book in a cramped, careful hand beneath her own. "Culhane's place is gone," he said, low, when the pain let him talk. "I could see it before the white came. His cattle are walking, drifting south with the wind. Nothing to stop them. No shelter, no hay put up but the marsh grass that's half rotten. They'll pile up on the first fence they hit and freeze standing. He shook his head. 4,000 head with the whole sky to run from. And your cows are standing in a warm barn behind a wall of sticks. Nobody answered him. There was nothing to say to it that the wind was not already saying. Late on the second night, the milk cow went into labor a month early, driven to it by the cold, and the calf came wrong. Roan felt it first, his hand inside her. The calf turned so a leg was back and the head bent, and he set his jaw and did what old Fenwick had shown him 20 years before on a night much like this one. He worked the leg forward in the dark, patient, talking low to the cow, and Verena held the lamp, and Pruitt held the cow's head, and Emil stood in the doorway of the stall, holding the second lamp with both hands and not making a sound. The cow fought him, and then she quit fighting, too tired and too cold to do more than groan, and that frightened Verena worse than the fighting had. A cow that quits has decided something. Roan felt it too and worked faster, his forearm gone numb to the shoulder, hunting the bent leg by touch alone in the dark of her, and twice he lost it, and twice he found it again and did not curse either time. Almost, he said, low, to the cow and not to them. Almost. Stay with me now. It took the better part of an hour. Then the calf slid free all at once into the straw, wet and steaming, and lay still. It did not breathe. Roan cleared its mouth with 2 fingers and rubbed it hard along the ribs, and it did not breathe. He rubbed harder. Nothing. Then he lifted the whole slick weight of it by the hind legs and swung it once, twice, to clear the fluid from its lungs the way his father had done it, and set it down and pressed the ribs, and the calf shuddered and coughed and drew a long rattling breath and bawled. The cow answered it. Roan sat back in the straw with his arms wet to the shoulder and said nothing, and Pruitt let out a breath that was almost a laugh, and Emil in the doorway was grinning so wide it looked like it hurt him. Verena set the lamp down and did not trust her voice. They had no time to keep the moment. Over the barn, out in the dark, something cracked. The third night was the one the whole winter had been walking toward. The wind topped 60 miles an hour, and the cold fell to 31 below, and out at the windbreak a lashing let go with a sound like a shot, and a whole section of the willow wall tore loose from its stakes and began to peel back in the wind. Verena saw it in the lamplight through the barn's high window, the dark wall opening like a door. If that section went, the wind would come through the gap, unbroken, and strike the offset door full, and even her baffle could not stand a straight blast at 60 miles an hour, and the door would pack shut with snow before morning, and the stock behind it would smother in the dark. She knotted the rope around her waist and put the free end in Roan Merrick's hands. "If I go down," she said, "you don't come after me. You hold the rope and you count. 3 tugs means I'm working. Slack means haul." Roan wrapped the rope twice around his forearm and set his boots. 3 tugs, he said. She went out into it. She could not see the willows. She could not see the rope past her own fist. She went by the posts, hand to flannel to hand, counting them off, the repair bag slung tight against her back, with Anton's strap doubled around her wrist. At the 4th post, the wind put its whole weight against her, and a stake beside her, one of Della's old split stakes driven that morning, snapped clean off at the ground, and the top of it struck her across the shoulders and drove her flat into the snow. Inside, Roan felt the rope go slack. He counted. He did not haul. He counted the way she had told him to, 1 breath, 2, his whole arm shaking with the wanting to pull, and Emil stood beside him with his hand on the rope too, and neither of them breathed. Out in the white, Verena got her hands under her. The repair bag had torn half off her back, swinging wild in the wind, and it would have been gone into the dark and the willow lengths and the wire with it, except that Anton's strap held. The old restitched leather held it looped to her wrist, and she dragged it back to her chest and got to her knees, and gave the rope 3 hard pulls. Roan felt the 3 tugs come up the line and let the breath go out of him. She reached the torn section on her belly. She could not stand in that wind and did not try. She lay in the drift and worked the loose willow back against the stakes and lashed it with the wire, wrapping and twisting with her bare fingers because gloves could not feel the wire, feeding a fresh short willow length, and where the wall had opened, weaving it tight into the standing wall on either side. The wire took the skin off her fingers, and she did not feel it. She felt only the shape of the weave under her hands, over and under, the pattern Anton had drilled into her on 100 fences, until her hands knew it in the dark, which was the only place it mattered now, because there was no light and no up and no down, only the willow and the wire and the wind trying to take both. Twice the gust lifted the whole loose section and tried to fold it back over her, and twice she lay her weight across it and pinned it with her body until the wind eased, then wove another turn while she could. The cold was in her to the bone. She had stopped shivering, which she knew was the bad sign, the one Anton had warned her of, and she made herself count the turns of wire out loud into the roaring so she would not slip quietly away from herself out there in the white. And then, because a section that fixed one gap could tear at a new seam, she went the length of the loosened run and relashed every stake, wire around wire, until the wall stood into the wind again and let it through again instead of catching it. It would not be pretty in the morning. It would hold until morning. She gave 3 tugs and came back down the rope, hand over hand, counting the flannel, and Roan hauled her the last of the way through the door and got it shut behind her and through the bar. She lay on the barn floor with the snow melting off her and the feeling gone out of her hands, and Roan knelt over her. "The wall?" he said. "It'll hold till morning," Verena said when she could talk. "Morning is enough," said Roan. Behind the canvas curtain in the warm corner, Greta was crying, thin and furious and alive. Emil had already gone to her. Pruitt lay spent against the woodpile by the stove where he had dragged himself after his hands gave out, watching the 2 of them on the floor with an expression he did not have a word for. Outside, the Marrowbone blizzard screamed on into the dark, and behind a wall of sticks and wire, everything that breathed at Larkspur Fold went on breathing. The 4th morning came still. The wind had blown itself out in the night, and Verena woke to a silence so complete it woke her, and stepped out into a world scrubbed white to the horizon under a hard blue sky. The drift stood 10 feet along the willows and along the creek, exactly where she had sent them. The offset door swung clear. The trough was sound. The hay was dry. She did not walk the place counting what it held. She walked it counting what had nearly failed. The snapped stake at the 4th post, the lashing that had let go on the 3rd night, and why a knot she had tied in a hurry back in October and not gone back to check. The seam in the baffle where the snow had started to pack before the wind died. She went inside and wrote every one of them in the ledger, in the same square hand, under the line that said all stock living. "You lived through it, and you're writing down what went wrong," Roan said, watching her. "A weakness that hides behind a success will kill you the next time," Verena said. "The storm didn't find that stake. I got lucky. Lucky isn't a plan." She closed the book. "Next fall I fix the knot before I need it." Osgood came out on the 4th day, breaking trail through drifts that had swallowed his fence lines, and he came into the warm barn and stood over the ledger a long time and read it clean through, every day of the storm, the trough and the wood and the hay and the wall, and at the end the honest list of near things written in the same hand as the victories. He closed the book and set his hand flat on the cover. "I've read 100 men's books after a storm," Osgood said. "They all read like sermons. Every line's a thing that worked." He looked up at her. "Yours is the first I've read that tells me what nearly killed her. That's the only kind that means anything." He put on his hat. "I believed it when I read the numbers. I believe it now that I've seen the ground. You keep this book, Kessler. When the association comes, asking how a quarter section carried its whole herd through the Marrowbone with no losses, I'm going to hand them this." He wrote something of his own in his small book before he left, and this time he turned it so she could see it. A single line, her name and the place and the date, and beside it 3 words, "No losses, confirmed." 20 years of burying hopeful men, and he had broken trail through 10 feet of snow to write down the one who had not needed burying. Pruitt was the next to speak, and it took him longer because the loudest doubter always finds the words hardest. "I laughed at those flags," Pruitt said. He was looking at the floor. "I'd have died 40 feet from this door with a joke still in my mouth. I followed the red things home." He held out Verena's cut-down gloves, the ones she had thawed his hands in. "I don't have anything to trade you for my life. I've got 2 good hands, come spring, and they're yours as long as you'll have them." "Keep the gloves," Verena said. "You'll want them for the fencing." That morning, Emil had come to the table and found the extra piece of cornbread Roan had left by his bowl, the way Roan had left it every morning since October. Emil looked at it. Then he ate his own piece and left the extra one sitting on the board, whole, untouched, and went out to help Pruitt dig to the crib. It sat there all day. A boy does not leave good bread on the table until the day he believes there will be more of it tomorrow. Verena saw it, and Roan saw it, and neither of them touched it or said a word about it, and that untouched piece of bread was the loudest thing said in that house all winter. Warren Colhane came last, a week later, when the drifts had settled enough to ride. He came alone, on a gaunt horse, and he sat in the yard and did not get down at first. The whole open range to the north was a graveyard. His 4,000 head had drifted before the wind with nothing to stop them, and piled against the south fences, and frozen there standing, and the count when it was done would not clear 500 living. He had lost in 3 nights what it had taken him 15 years to build, and he had lost it on the open ground he had mocked her for fencing off from. He looked at the willow wall, patched and standing. He looked at the barn full of living stock, and the dry hay, and the clear door. "How?" Colhan said. It was not the whole question. It was all of the question he could get out. Verena looked at him a moment. There was no gloating in her. Anton had never gloated over a man whose well had gone dry, and neither would she. "Come down off the horse," she said. "I'll show you." Colhane got down. "Show me," he said. She showed him. The windbreak set 34 feet off the corner, woven loose to comb the wind, not stop it. The offset door, the raised crib with the air running through it, the self-draining line. She showed him the ledger and the honest list at the end of it, and he read the near failures the same way Osgood had, and understood at last that the difference between his empty range and her full barn was not luck, and was not size, and was not a man's country against a widow's foolishness. It was that she had gone looking for every weak place before the winter could, and he had trusted the open sky. "I fought you over that road," Colhane said, "so I could run more head on ground I couldn't shelter." He looked out at the white waste that had been his herd, I ran 4,000 where I could keep none. You ran 40 where you could keep all 40. He put his hat back on. The road stays open. I'll not file on it again. He rode home across his own dead range, and he was a quieter man after that, and a better neighbor, though it cost the flats a hard winter to make him one. Spring came late and came all at once, the way it does on the northern flats, the creek loud with melt, and the willows Della planted going green before anything else. Emil turned 10 that spring and did not hoard a single thing. He ate his fill and left food on the table without a thought, the way a child does who has quit counting the days he has left. Greta learned to pull herself up on the leg of the finished cradle. The place that had been dying when Verena first walked onto it went loud with living, calves and chickens, and a boy shouting across the yard, and the low, steady argument of two people who had learned to run a place together. And with the grass came the plain business of making the thing they had become into a thing the law would hold. Roan brought a paper to the table one evening, drawn up in town, and set it in front of Verena. A partnership in Larkspur Fold, share and share, the low ground, and the water and the stock named out between the two of them equal. And below that, in plain words, a home for Emil and for Greta, guaranteed, deeded, theirs to keep regardless of what did or did not ever pass between the two adults who had signed it. Verena read it twice. You didn't have to name the children into the land, she said. I'm not giving you what was mine, Roan said. I'm naming what you already carried in here. He looked at the barn, the wall, the crib. You built half of this place with your own hands, and the other half you kept from dying. A man doesn't give a partner her own work. He writes her name on it so nobody can take it off. She signed it. He signed it. Osgood, who had ridden out to be a witness because she had asked him and no other, signed it under them both. That night, after the children slept, Roan set 2 tin cups on the stove and filled them both, and they stood there in the warm without saying much, the way they had taken to standing. I'll stay till the snow's gone, Verena said. It was an old thing to say. The snow was already gone. Stay till the grass comes back, Roan said. The grass was already back. It was green in the yard. Longer than that, Verena said. They were married in May in the yard under a sky the willows leaned into, with Osgood standing up as witness and old Fenwick beside him, and no fuss made of it beyond a good dinner and a fiddle. Colhane did not come, but in the morning after, there was a bundle in the yard that had not been there the night before. A fresh bundle of split steaks, seasoned and true, 100 of them, more than a fence line would ever need, left without a note because the man who left them had no words for it either. Verena stood the bundle against the barn beside the place where Della's old ones had leaned and left it there and understood it for what it was. Roan finished the cradle that spring. He fixed the rockers on at last, the ones he had cut clean 3 years before and never fastened, and he set it by the stove where the lamp caught it. Greta had outgrown it by then. But it rocked now the way it was always meant to, empty and finished and waiting, and when Roan set it going with one hand and it kept on rocking, Verena remembered the first night and the thing he had said at the door. Some rooms are built and never filled. That one was filled now. Emil was the first to say it. He came in from the barn one morning with a calf following him, the same calf that had not breathed, grown now and pushing its nose into his coat pocket after bread, and he called across the yard without thinking about it, the way a boy calls out a thing he has stopped being afraid of. Perron, she's after my bread again, and did not even notice he had said it. Roan noticed. Roan stood very still in the barn door for a moment, and then he went to help the boy with the calf, and his voice was not quite steady when he answered. Greta took her first steps in June across the plank floor by the stove, from the finished cradle toward the 2 tin cups and the man beside them, her fists out and her face fierce with the effort of it, and she crossed the whole floor on her own and grabbed a handful of Roan's trouser leg and pulled herself up and said, plain as anything, "Pa." Roan picked her up. He did not say a word. He had never been a man for saying the thing. He set his hand flat against her back, the way Verena set her hand flat against a wall she meant to trust, and held her, and looked at the woman by the stove over the child's head. And that was the whole of it said. Larkspur Fold did not come through the Marrowbone blizzard, because the winter went soft. The winter went soft on no one. On the open range, the drifts stayed full of Colhane's cattle into June, and the flats did not thaw clean until the grass was already tall. It came through because every weak place had been found and mended before the wind could reach it. A wall that combed the wind instead of catching it. A door the drift could not pack. A book that wrote down what nearly failed. Verena and Roan never rescued each other. She built the wall, and he held the rope, and neither one of them could have stood the winter alone, and both of them had believed for a long time that standing alone was the same as being strong. They quit believing it. The second cup still steams beside the first every morning, and out past the barn, 34 feet off the corner where a dead woman once wasted an afternoon, the willows lean into the same wind they always leaned into and let just enough of it through.